At 1000 hours on a cold morning over occupied Kharkiv Oblast, a single Ukrainian Su-27 drops into the landscape, its wings almost brushing the frozen ground. To anyone watching from above, it would look like a shadow racing along a riverbed, pushed forward by engines burning fuel at a rate no pilot wants to see. No air cover, no escort. Just one aircraft heading toward a point on the map that Ukrainian intelligence says must be reached today. What lies ahead is not a front line, but a layered web of sensors and missiles designed to punish anything that climbs too high or turns too late. And in the next few minutes, this pilot will be forced to do both. The battlefield north of Kharkiv is not simply a front line. It is a carefully constructed web of Russian air defense power that turns the sky into a controlled zone. From Belgorod into occupied Kharkiv Oblast, Moscow has placed long-range and mid-range systems, fighter patrols, and electronic warfare tools to create what amounts to a lethal geometry of interception. The cornerstone of this setup is the S-400 Triumph battery, capable of striking aircraft at distances beyond 300 kilometers and guiding interception missiles via radar systems that steer beams without moving parts. Behind that layer, the S-300 units provide shorter range cover, exploiting terrain, valleys, and ridgelines to cut off escape corridors. Fighter jets, notably the Su-27, operate in overlapping zones, ready to engage targets that manage to slip past the SAM umbrella. Added to that are Russian EW assets, such as the Kraska 4, which jam or blind GPS and other navigation signals, forcing any attacking aircraft or weapon to rely on inertia rather than satellite precision. Within this layered network lies what analysts call a probability box, a term for a kill zone defined not by where an aircraft is, but by where it must be if it is carrying out a known mission. The Russian system does not wait for the jet to appear. It fires into expected windows. For example, when Ukrainian aircraft release a winged bomb like the JDAMER, they must climb to certain altitudes, achieve set speeds, adopt release profiles that glide toward the target at defined ranges. Those parameters become predictable and therefore vulnerable. This shift from reactive to anticipatory defense gives Moscow the ability to shape the battlefield. The box is not drawn on maps, but calculated in layers of radar, missile arcs, and fighter tracks. A Ukrainian pilot must not only dodge detection but also avoid stepping into the window the enemy has prepared. What makes that so hazardous is the nature of the JDAMER itself. Winged and extended range, it gives Ukraine one of the few tools capable of striking deep into Russian-held territory from a relatively safe standoff distance, yet even that safe distance is only safe so long as it remains unpredictable. If the aircraft must climb to 27,000 feet or fly at 400 knots to get proper release geometry, those sweet spots become signature moments. The Russians know them. And when the parameters of altitude and speed become known, the risk to the aircraft becomes far greater. According to sources, under ideal release conditions, the bomb can glide 70 to 80 kilometers toward a target. Hence, Ukraine is faced with painful trade-offs. The JDAMER may be the only bomb in their inventory capable of collapsing a hardened command post located behind the front line. Without it, the enemy's logistics, drone networks, artillery hubs, and sensor nodes remain intact. In short, if the mission fails, supply lines stay hot, opposition coordination stays sharp, and the war drags on. When a Russian command post is taken out by such a strike, the strategic ripple is significant. Artillery that once fired within minutes of target acquisition may become silent. Drone uplinks lose uplink points. Logistics convoys lose their routing hubs. Transmission lines for ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, go dark. This is not simply destruction of a building. It undermines the enemy's ability to operate, communicate, and project power. The targeting of command nodes is thus a lever, not just for tactical destruction, but for strategic disruption. In sum, the pilot of that Su-27 is not simply flying toward a target. He is entering a trap whose boundaries have been mathematically drawn by the enemy. The probability box casts its shadow well before the mission begins, and unless that pilot breaks the script, he risks becoming predictable, exposed, and vulnerable. And it is inside this probability box that the Su-27 begins its first duel, long before the pilot ever sees the target. The Su-27 begins its approach by flying as low as possible, because terrain is the only shield that can break the view of long-range Russian radars. The pilot drops into a narrow river valley, using each bend of the landscape to block enemy sensors. At this height, the jet moves fast and rough, and every second closer to the target brings more pressure. Flying at low altitude keeps him below the radar horizon, which limits what long-range radars can see, especially when the ground rises between the aircraft and the sensor. This technique is used by many air forces when crossing hostile airspace, and its value is widely noted in open-source studies of low-level penetration tactics. The Russian S-400 system tries to fight back with powerful detection tools, because its main radar can scan far beyond the front line. According to technical data, the S-400's 91N6E gravestone radar can detect targets at ranges well above 300 kilometers and refresh tracking information up to 100 times every second. This gives Russian operators enough time to pick out a climbing jet and send guidance updates to a missile long before the target comes close. Even when the aircraft stays low, any brief rise in altitude can expose it for a moment, and that is often all the radar needs to generate a track. The system does not fire at the jet directly because doing so would waste time and fuel. Instead, the S-400 uses a method called proportional navigation to guess where the aircraft will be at a later point. A simple way to imagine this is to picture a quarterback throwing a pass to a receiver who is running down the field. The ball is not thrown at the receiver's current position, but at the place where the player is expected to be seconds later. Missiles use a more advanced version of this idea, constantly adjusting their path to reach the predicted point. This makes the missile faster and more efficient, and it explains why long-range shots can still be dangerous, even when the aircraft is trying to hide. Russian operators aim for what they call the JDAM window, which is the band of altitude and speed the jet must reach if it wants to release a JDAM-ER with full range. They fire toward that window instead of chasing the jet, because they assume that any Ukrainian pilot carrying such a bomb must eventually climb to about 27,000 feet. That climb creates exposure, and exposure creates opportunity. This tactic is described in several assessments of Russian air defense behavior since 2022. The Ukrainian pilot knows this, so he delays the climb for as long as possible and dives even deeper into the valley. He tries to slide into a radar shadow, which is a blind zone created when the ground blocks the radar beam. If he can keep the aircraft inside that shadow, the missile loses the updated tracking data it needs to correct its path. Once the updates stop, the missile continues on old information, and the prediction becomes weaker every second. Terrain masking is one of the only ways to break the connection between launcher and missile without using electronic countermeasures. Flying this low demands steady nerves, because the engines burn fuel very fast at such altitude. At low level, the AL-31F engines on the Su-27 consume far more fuel than they do at high altitude, and this forces the pilot to make every second count. The faster burn rate means he cannot stay low forever. The longer he delays the climb, the less fuel he will have for the escape. This trade-off between survival and fuel is a familiar challenge for combat pilots, and it shapes every part of the approach. The Su-27 survives the first round of long-range tracking, but each turn and dive steals fuel and time. The S-400 loses him for the moment, yet the danger does not end there. Other weapons lie ahead, and they are designed to strike much closer and much faster. But escaping the S-400's reach only pushes the Su-27 into something far more lethal waiting ahead. The Su-27 enters the mid-range zone where Russian S-300 systems wait, and this part of the battlefield is often more dangerous than the long-range threats. As the jet moves out of the deep valley and into slightly higher terrain, the aircraft's radar altimeter sends regular signals to measure height above the ground. These signals, which operate around 4.3 GHz, can be picked up by Russian radars that monitor low-flying aircraft. Reports on S-300 operations explain that the system can track targets by detecting these emissions, even when the aircraft stays close to the terrain. The Russian crew uses the grill-pan radar, an electronically steered system that sends narrow beams across the sky without moving its antenna. This design allows the radar to search wide sectors very quickly, giving operators the ability to follow several targets at once. The beams shift in microseconds, and because they are so precise, they can lock onto targets that fly low and fast. As the Su-27 crosses a ridge, the radar receives a clean return, and the tracking display stabilizes long enough for the missile crew to prepare a launch. 29M-8-2M missiles rise from their tubes within seconds, and each missile is guided using a semi-active command method known as SAG. In this mode, a human operator sits at a console and watches the radar picture in real time. Instead of allowing an onboard seeker to chase the aircraft, the operator flies the missile by keeping crosshairs centered on the target icon. Reports from military analysts note that SAG remains effective because it is difficult to jam. The operator can correct the missile's path even when countermeasures interfere with radar returns. The Ukrainian pilot reacts immediately by releasing chaff cut to a wavelength that disrupts the radar picture. Each strip reflects radar energy in a way that makes several false targets appear behind the aircraft. While the chaff spreads, the pilot pulls toward the slope of a nearby hill, so the ridge can block part of the radar beam. Terrain masking is one of the few ways to confuse a manually guided missile, and in this case, the operator briefly shifts the crosshairs toward the stronger return created by the chaff cloud. The first missile adjusts toward the false target, loses its angle, and begins to drift off course. The second missile holds lock longer, and the pilot must change tactics again to survive. He flies directly along the curve of the ridge, forcing the missile to follow a narrow path where small turns create large tracking errors. This tactic is risky because the jet comes close to the ground at high speed, yet it buys a few seconds of safety. Those seconds matter because a new danger appears. Another S-300 battery has detected the jet from a different angle. The second battery fires 4 missiles almost at once, and each one follows a different intercept solution. This saturation fire style dates back to Soviet doctrine, which trained operators to shoot into several possible escape paths, so the target could not predict where the danger would come from. Military studies confirm that layered S-300 units often coordinate launches to trap fast-moving aircraft between intersecting guidance beams. With 4 new missiles racing toward him, the pilot uses his last option. He switches to full afterburner and climbs almost straight upward. The sudden vertical move forces the guidance beams to cross each other, creating interference between the tracking signals. Because the missiles depend on clean radar input, the cross signals confuse the operators, and 2 missiles lose lock instantly. A third missile continues forward but cannot match the steep climb angle and passes under the aircraft. The fourth missile runs out of fuel while trying to turn upward and falls away before detonating at a safe distance. The violent climb saves the aircraft, but it also reveals the Su-27's position to sensors across the region, and the brief climb burns fuel at a rate the pilot cannot afford. The evasive maneuvers save the aircraft, but they also expose its position to a new threat already accelerating toward him. As the Ukrainian Su-27 emerges from the terrain, masking and rises toward its bomb release altitude, a new threat appears on the radar screen. A Russian Su-35, silent until now, locks the target from roughly 150 kilometers away using its advanced Irbis-E radar. This radar system allows the Su-35 to detect and track multiple targets simultaneously, engaging up to 8 at once, according to open-source data. The moment the lock is confirmed, the mission shifts from bomb drop operation to aerial survival. Almost immediately, a long-range R-37M missile streaks out from the Su-27. It uses a dual-pulse motor design. The first pulse propels it rapidly, then it glides, and finally the second pulse activates in the terminal phase for high maneuverability. Its top speed reaches about Mach 6, making it one of the fastest operational air-to-air missiles in service. Because of that velocity, the time from launch to intercept becomes alarmingly short. Timing is critical. The missile is expected to reach the Su-27 in roughly 45 seconds, while the Ukrainian jet needs 40 seconds to climb to the optimal 27,000-foot altitude required to release its winged bomb with full effect. In this shrinking window, the pilot must choose: climb and risk exposure, or release early and reduce bomb effectiveness. Choosing wisely becomes a matter of life and death. The pilot opts to complete the climb and drop the bomb just before full engagement begins. While the Su-27 is in the delivery profile, the R-37M closes rapidly. The pilot then pulls a hard 9G turn, rolling inverted and releasing a flare and chaff sequence. The evasive maneuver causes the missile to misalign by several tens of meters, just enough that it detonates harmlessly nearby. Nevertheless, the blast and radar fragments rip into the jet's skin and engine bay, causing internal damage and overheats. The aircraft is wounded, not defeated. Fuel gauges now read approximately 18% remaining, a stark number given the distance yet to cover and the damage sustained. With hydraulic pressure dropping and engine temperatures spiking, the pilot must fly the wounded machine at low altitude back toward friendly territory. Every minute in the air now carries risk, from mechanical failure, enemy sensors, or further missile launches. This engagement illustrates how modern aerial warfare often happens unseen, far above the ground or below radar horizon. The dogfight isn't a turning circle duel at 1,000 feet. It is a calculated exchange of missiles and sensors at 20,000 to 30,000 feet. The Su-35 and R-37M used long-range detection, data links, and terminal pulse motors to engage a target before the pilot of the Su-27 could even see his adversary visually. That means the Ukrainian pilot was forced into a tactical inch-by-inch fight. Fly precisely, release accurately, evade masterfully, and then limp home. From a strategic perspective, this encounter underscores several truths. First, Russia's air superiority assets can reach well into contested airspace, threatening not just fighter jets, but the aircraft delivering weapons deep inside enemy zones. Second, the Ukrainian pilot's decision to push through after losing the initial stealth of low-level ingress reflects the larger stakes. The bomb must reach the target. Third, this kind of engagement demonstrates how the battlefield's upper layers, radar, missile arcs, network links, matter just as much as the frontline trenches and artillery. For the pilot, survival is not victory. But returning to base with the bomb delivered and aircraft damaged means the mission achieved its aim. The target may not know exactly when, how, or by whom the bomb arrived, but the effect will ripple through enemy command structures. Meanwhile, Russian fighters and long-range missiles proved that they can project power well beyond the forward edge. With the aircraft damaged and fleeing at treetop level, the responsibility for the mission shifts to the bomb now gliding through contested airspace. The JDAM-ER begins its own fight the moment it leaves the Su-27, and its first task is to transform from a simple bomb into a guided weapon. As it drops away from the pylon, small explosive bolts fire, allowing the folding wings to swing open and lock into place. This action gives the bomb the lift it needs to glide over long distances, and the guidance system immediately checks its GPS receiver and its internal navigation unit, known as the INS. According to U.S. Air Force documents, the JDAM series uses both systems together to maintain accuracy during the entire flight. Within seconds, the bomb enters an area flooded with electronic noise because Russian units deploy the Kharkiv 4 system in several sectors. This platform sends powerful interference into GPS frequencies to prevent incoming weapons from getting clean satellite signals. Open source analysis notes that the Krasuka 4 can block or distort navigation channels and force guided bombs to depend on backup systems. The JDAM-ER reacts by switching to the encrypted M code, which is harder to jam and designed for military use. Even so, the signal becomes weaker as it moves deeper into the contested zone. When the bomb finally loses GPS contact, the INS takes full control. This system relies on gyroscopes and accelerometers to track movement, but it slowly collects errors, a process called drift. Reports explain that INS drift grows with time, which is why the JDAM uses GPS updates whenever possible to correct its course. As the glide continues, the bomb moves through a period of uncertainty, flying without satellite help and depending only on its internal sensors. Drift increases with every passing second, and the bomb comes dangerously close to missing the target cluster. Then the breakthrough arrives. 4 satellites reappear in the receiver's field of view, providing enough information to update the weapon's position. The guidance computer corrects the drift and recenters the flight path. The JDAM-ER now runs the final calculations for the terminal dive, checking wind direction, altitude, and approach angle. Below the bomb are 3 9-story buildings standing side by side, each separated by about 30 meters. Only one of them is the Russian command post. To avoid striking the wrong building, the JDAM-ER uses its radar altimeter, which measures height above the ground by sending rapid pulses downward. It also compares stored satellite images to the shape of the roofs underneath. Studies on JDAM accuracy note that the system can match visual signatures from stored data when GPS becomes unreliable. The bomb identifies the correct structure using small battle damage marks and confirms with high confidence. The control fins adjust for a final 72-degree dive. The impact angle allows the weapon to break through 3 floors before the delayed fuse triggers the explosion. The shockwave moves horizontally inside the building, cutting through supports and causing the internal collapse known as a pancake effect. While the chosen building falls in sequence, the 2 next to it suffer only broken windows and exterior cracks, proof of how precise modern guided weapons have become. This accuracy is the reason Ukraine uses the JDAM-ER for these deep strikes, because a clean hit can remove a key command post with minimal risk to the surrounding area. And while the building collapses floor by floor, the Su-27 is still fighting a quieter battle of its own. Russia is trying to turn the sky into a probability box, using S-400 batteries, S-300 traps, Su-35 patrols, and strong jamming systems to force every aircraft into a predictable path. These systems are all described in open-source studies from CSIS and RUSI, which explain how Moscow relies on patterns instead of real-time control. Ukraine survives inside that box by doing the opposite, because the pilot must use irregular moves, sudden dives, and late climbs to stay alive long enough to strike the target. The mission shows that modern war is not only about missiles and radars, but also about nerve, instinct, and the courage to break the script when the enemy expects order. This was not only a bombing run, it was a clash between math and human instinct, where every second and every meter shaped the outcome. If you want more reports like this, remember to subscribe to Military Force for the next analysis.